of engines rolled across the fairgrounds like distant thunder, shaking the aluminum bleachers and rattling the banners strung along the fence. Dust hung in the air, glowing gold beneath the stadium lights as the final lap began. Steve leaned forward over the handlebars of his dirt track bike, every muscle in his body tuned to the rhythm of the race. Throttle, lean, slide, recover. This was the race, the one everyone talked about all season, the State Fair Championship. The crowd was bigger, louder, more electric than anything he'd felt before. Years of racing, of broken bones and long drives and lonely motel rooms had led him here. He hit the final turn wide, letting the back tire drift just enough to slingshot him out of the corner. For a split second, everything slowed. The noise, the lights, even his thoughts. Then the world snapped back into motion as he surged ahead, crossing the finish line just a fraction of a second before the rider behind him. The checkered flag waved. Steve had won. The crowd erupted. He didn't hear individual voices, just a tidal wave of sound crashing over him as he coasted into the infield. He pulled off his helmet, his dark hair damp with sweat, his chest heaving, a grin spread across his face, wide and disbelieving. He had finally done it. Moments later, he was standing near the podium, still catching his breath as officials rushed around organizing the ceremony. Cameras flashed. Someone clapped him on the back. Another shoved a microphone toward him, asking how it felt to win. "Feels like everything I worked for just paid off," he said, still trying to process it himself. Then someone called his name again, and he turned toward the podium. That's when he saw her, Robin. She stood beside the trophy table, holding the large silver cup with both hands. She wore a bright smile that somehow felt genuine despite the chaos around her. Her hair caught in the light, and for a brief moment, everything else faded into the background. Steve had seen trophy presenters before, plenty of them. But it was part of the sport, pageantry, promotion, spectacle. But something about Robin felt different. When his name was announced, he stepped up onto the podium. She approached him, her smile softening as she met his eyes. "Congratulations," she said, her voice warm and steady. "Thanks," he replied, suddenly aware that he was still covered in dust and sweat. "Feels unreal." She handed him the trophy, their fingers brushing briefly. It was nothing, a fraction of a second, but it lingered. "Looks good on you," she added. He chuckled. "I was thinking the same thing about you." Her laugh came easy, not rehearsed or forced. It caught him off guard in the best way. Then the camera started clicking. They posed together, him holding the trophy, her standing beside him, smiling for the sponsors and the press. They shifted positions, angled toward different photographers, repeating the same gestures again and again. And between flashes, they talked. "So, do you always win the big races?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "First time," he admitted. "Guess I picked a good night." "I'd say so." "And you? Do you always do this? Present trophies?" "Not always. This is kind of a special event." He nodded, then paused. "So, what do you do when you're not handing out life-changing awards?" She smiled as if she'd been waiting for that question. "I play competitive cornhole." He blinked. "Wait, seriously?" "Very seriously," she said. "Regional tournaments, national circuits. I travel a lot." Steve stared at her for a second, then laughed. "No way." "What?" "I play too." Now it was her turn to blink. "You're kidding." "Nope. Started as a hobby, got a little out of hand." "How good are you?" He shrugged. "Good enough to make a few finals, but not world class or anything." She raised an eyebrow. "We might have to test that." "I'd like that," he said. Another photographer called for their attention, and they turned back toward the cameras. But something had shifted. The conversation had cracked open a door neither of them expected. Between poses, Robin spoke again. "So, what else do you do when you're not racing or throwing beanbags?" Steve hesitated for a second, then said, "I volunteer at an animal rescue back home." Her expression changed instantly, brighter, more engaged. "You're kidding." "Nope. I do too," she said almost too quickly. "Mostly dogs, some cats. We foster when we can." Steve felt a strange, quiet excitement settle in his chest. Same here. They looked at each other, and this time it wasn't just polite interest. It was recognition. Two things in common, two worlds overlapping in a way neither of them saw coming. The photographers kept snapping pictures, but now the smiles weren't just for the cameras. Later that night, after the crowds thinned and the lights dimmed, Steve found Robin near one of the quieter corners of the fairgrounds. She was sitting on a wooden bench scrolling through her phone. "Hey," he said. She looked up and smiled. "Hey, champion." He sat down beside her. "So, competitive cornhole and animal rescue. That's a pretty unique combination." "Right back at you," she said. "Motorcycle racing and cornhole isn't exactly common either." They talked for hours about tournaments and strategies, how to control spin on a bag, how to read the board, how to stay calm under pressure, about animals they'd rescued, the ones that broke their hearts and the ones that found homes, about life on the road, about loneliness, about what came next. By the time the fairgrounds were nearly empty, something had changed between them. It wasn't sudden or overwhelming. It was steady, grounded, real. When they finally stood to leave, neither of them wanted the night to end. "So," Robin said, "are you heading out tomorrow?" "Yeah, I got another race next weekend." She nodded. "I've got a tournament in 2 weeks." Steve hesitated, then said, "Maybe I could come watch." She smiled. "Maybe you should." Over the next few months, they found ways to stay connected. Steve started showing up at Robin's tournaments whenever he could. At first, he stood on the sidelines, watching her play with a level of focus and precision that impressed even him. She was calm, calculated, and deadly accurate. He started competing again, too, entering tournaments alongside her. They practiced together, they traveled together, and somewhere along the way, they fell in love. It wasn't dramatic or complicated. It was built in quiet moments. Long drives, shared meals, early mornings setting up boards in empty parking lots. Eventually, Steve faced a decision he hadn't expected. Racing had been his life for years. It was what defined him. But it wasn't what fulfilled him anymore. One evening, sitting next to Robin outside a small tournament venue, he said, "I think I'm done racing." She turned to him. "Done?" He nodded. "I love it. I always will. But this..." He gestured toward the boards, the players, the simple joy of it all. "This feels right." She studied him for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Yeah," he said. "I've never been more sure of anything." She smiled. "Then let's see how far we can take this." They took it farther than either of them imagined. Within a year, they were competing on the professional circuit full-time. Their chemistry, both on and off the boards, made them a formidable team. They complemented each other perfectly. Steve's aggressive style balanced by Robin's precision and consistency. They started winning. Then they started dominating. Crowds began to recognize them. Their matches drew attention, not just for their skill, but for their story. The racer who walked away from the track, the trophy girl who became a champion. Together they became something bigger. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a national championship tournament, broadcast online to thousands of viewers. Robin stepped up to the board with a chance to make history. She had already landed 96 consecutive bags. The record stood at 96. The crowd fell silent. Steve stood behind her, watching, steady and supportive. Robin took a breath, set her stance, and threw. The ball arced through the air, perfectly aligned. It dropped cleanly into the hole. 97. The crowd exploded. Robin stood there for a second, almost stunned, before turning to Steve. He was already smiling, already proud. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she replied. That moment launched them into a new level of recognition. Videos of the record spread across the internet. Their story followed close behind. They became more than athletes. They became ambassadors. Using their growing platform, they began raising money for animal rescue organizations across the country. They hosted charity tournaments, partnered with shelters, and used every opportunity to shine a light on animals in need. Their fans didn't just follow their games, they followed their mission. Years later, sitting together at yet another tournament, Steve looked over at Robin as she lined up a throw. "Funny how this all started," he said. She glanced at him. "Yeah? Yeah, one race, one trophy, one conversation." She smiled. "Best trophy presentation ever." He laughed. "No question." She tossed the bag. It slid perfectly into the hole. He reached for her hand, and just like that, in the middle of a crowded tournament, surrounded by cheers and competition, they stood together, partners in every sense of the word, not just in the game, but in life.